They offered her as a joke, not as a choice, not as a daughter, as a throwaway. Raylan Barry, the quiet, unwanted, adopted girl, was sent to a billionaire's mansion because her stepmother thought it would be funny. A humiliation. A guaranteed rejection. But fate had other plans. Because the moment Elliot Diaz saw her, drenched, trembling, clutching a sketchbook like it was the last piece of her soul, he didn't see a joke. He saw the one thing he'd been searching for his entire life. And by the time this story ends, you'll understand why the world chose her too. If you're ready for a story that will grab your heart and refuse to let go, like this video, subscribe, and comment the country you're watching from. The Pacific wind was wild that morning, whipping through the empty Portland shoreline, flipping the pages of a tiny, battered sketchbook as if the universe itself had decided to steal it. Raylan Barry, 22, soft curls in her face, sweater 2 sizes too big, and the emotional stability of a startled kitten, sprinted down the wet sand after it. "Hey, no, don't you dare!" she yelled at the sketchbook as it slid toward the water like it had booked a vacation without her. It didn't have legs, but the ocean did. A wave lunged forward and swallowed the sketchbook whole. Raylan dove after it, knee-deep in freezing water, flailing, slipping, looking like a baby deer learning gravity for the first time, when a firm, warm hand closed over the book at the exact same moment as her trembling fingers. She looked up, and everything inside her chest froze. Tall, broad shoulders, dark hair tousled by the wind, eyes sharp and unreadable, storm gray, steady, too intense to belong to a normal man. Barefoot, sleeves rolled to the elbow, posture relaxed, like danger never touched him. Elliot Diaz. The billionaire nobody approached. The man Portland whispered about. The CEO whose silence scared entire boardrooms. And he was holding her sketchbook like it was something priceless. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice was deep, controlled, but with a warmth that hit her like a shock. Raylan blinked up at him. Once, twice, 3 times. I was saving the book," she whispered. He raised a brow. "The book was running away?" "Yes," she said honestly. "It does that." A beat, then, just for a split second, the corner of his mouth lifted. Not a full smile. Just the kind that makes the world tilt a little. She didn't know the barefoot stranger would appear again. She didn't know he lived in the mansion she was being shipped off to like unwanted mail. She didn't know he was the billionaire her family had offered her to as a joke. And she didn't know she would become the greatest gift he never expected. Before we continue, like this story, subscribe, comment, the country you're watching from, and share this video if you're already loving this story. What comes next will blow your mind. One day before the beach, the Barry household was a battlefield disguised as a home. Raylan scrubbed pots until her knuckles stung. She folded laundry she'd never worn, made meals she wasn't allowed to touch, and stayed small, always small, because being noticed meant being used. Angelina, her stepmother, hovered like a vulture over every chore. Aaliyah, her half-sister, treated Raylan like living background noise, and Collins, her adoptive father, once warm and gentle, now obeyed Angelina like a soldier following commands. Raylan was the outsider, the house ghost, the easiest target. But everything changed the morning Angelina found an ad. Billionaire philanthropist Elliot Diaz, seeking partner for legacy program. Compensation $10 million. Angelina's eyes sparkled. Aaliyah laughed with cruel delight. "Send Raylan," Aaliyah snorted. "He'll reject her in 5 seconds. We'll still collect the participation money." Angelina smirked. "She's perfect. Disposable and profitable." They offered her the way someone offers an old lamp they don't want. They didn't tell her until the envelope hit the kitchen table. "You leave tomorrow," Angelina said, already celebrating as if the money were in her purse. Raylan stared at the letter, betrayal burning through her chest. But she still packed, still clutched her sketchbook, still whispered to herself, "One day, just survive one more day." The next afternoon, Raylan stood before a massive iron gate, holding her still damp sketchbook. The Diaz estate looked like it had been built by someone allergic to poor people. She pressed the intercom. Hi, I'm Raylan Barry. I think I was selected." "You're the fourth finalist today," a polished voice replied. "Please enter." Fourth? There were others? She swallowed hard. "Well, here we go," she whispered to the sketchbook. Inside the foyer, two women sat like royalty awaiting peasants. Alexandria, tall, icy, designer everything, posture engineered by NASA. Aaliyah, glamorous, ruthless, eyes sharper than knives. Both looked at Raylan like she had tracked mud across their souls. "Oh," Alexandria said with a slow, dangerous smile. "The adopted one." Aaliyah didn't look up from her phone. "She won't last an hour." Heat rushed to Raylan's cheeks. She wished she could disappear. Then a voice cut through the room. "Miss Barry." Deep, calm, controlled. Raylan turned and nearly forgot how lungs worked. It was him, the man from the beach. Except this time he wasn't barefoot. He wasn't windswept or soft-eyed. Elliot Diaz walked toward them in a tailored charcoal suit that looked carved onto him. His expression was cool, unreadable. The man from the sand had vanished. But his eyes, for one breath, one heartbeat, softened when they landed on her sketchbook. Then he shut it away behind professionalism. "Welcome," he said simply. Alexandria straightened instantly. Aaliyah finally looked up. Raylan's heart dropped to her stomach. He wasn't just the billionaire. He was the decision, the future, the one person she needed not to embarrass herself in front of, and he was the only person who'd ever pulled her out of the water. Something had begun, something none of them expected. If this story is already getting you gripped, hit like, subscribe, and comment your country. What's about to come next changes everything. The moment the door clicked shut behind Blake, a silence settled over Harrington House like powder on a piano. Raylan sat very still on the left-hand sofa, hands folded so tightly her knuckles hurt, the little sketchbook resting on her lap like a talisman. The chandeliers above threw soft, impossible light. Somewhere far away, the ocean breathed in and out. An assistant appeared as if on cue and led them through a corridor that smelled faintly of lemon polish and old money. At the end of the hall, a small office door bore the words in tasteful gold: Media and Compliance. Two clipboard-bearing production assistants waited on either side, their expressions neutral, the way people look when they hold someone's fate in their hands. "Welcome, Miss Barry," one said. "Before the evening, please sign the compliance agreement." She slid a tablet toward Raylan, stylus poised. The screen glowed. Harrington House, public broadcast, and participant agreement. Everything you do may be recorded and broadcast live. Raylan's fingers trembled as she took the stylus. The legalese scrolled by in a blur: liability, consent, rights, non-disclosure clauses that looped like vines. She read the sentence that mattered most. By participating, you acknowledge your activities here may be filmed and disseminated worldwide. She looked down at her damp shoes and thought of the bus ride, of Angelina's face when she'd thrown the letter like it was garbage. She thought of Collins, of his hands on her shoulders the last time he'd tried to tell her everything would be fine. She signed. The assistant's smile was professional. "Good, dinner will be at 7. Cameras are live. If you need anything, let us know." Cameras. Live. The word echoed in her mind like a laugh. She imagined a million little lenses, invisible and implacable, watching the way she would hold a fork. She thought, absurdly, about the sketchbook. She tucked it inside her jacket. When they walked into the dining room, it was as if someone had placed her inside a porcelain world. The table stretched like a small runway, set with forks in increasing sizes, knives that shone like mirrors, plates so delicate she imagined they would know if she breathed on them. At the head of the table, Blake sat with the kind of composure that made the room inhale with him. Alexandria sat to his right. Artful posture, a gown that seemed to have been painted on. Aaliyah, blonde, perfect lips, a smile tight enough to cut, sat to his left, scrolling through her phone with the practiced look of someone whose life is a headline. Blake introduced a producer quietly. "Welcome. We'll begin with dinner and some light conversation. Remember, it's all for charity and transparency." Alexandria's voice slid like polished marble. "Mr. Diaz, I'd love to discuss legacy partnerships. I have a portfolio of collaborations, university ties, charity fairs, measurable impact." Aaliyah looked up, arch and smooth. "I find that image matters. Under your name, Mr. Diaz, an event has the power to shift cultural narratives. Image is everything." Their words were precise, sharpened for an audience and a board of shareholders. Raylan felt them settle like dust on her. She wanted to tell them the truth, that she'd been pushed into this like an unwanted dress, but instead she smiled like she'd been trained to smile. Small, apologetic. The first course arrived like an art exhibit. A waiter announced each element with the solemnity of a poetry reading. Raylan stared at the tiny mound of food as if it were a puzzle she was too clumsy to solve. The forks arrayed before her were a mystery. She chose the outermost one because a voice in her head suggested it should be used first. She stabbed delicately, balancing a micro portion of something creamy and suspiciously aerodynamic. That's when the cheese decided to rebel. It slipped off the fork like a tiny, tragic diver, and plopped onto the plate with an audible, humiliating splat. Raylan's face went hot enough to burn. For a heartbeat, the room stopped. Alexandria's smile froze. Aaliyah raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. The cameras pinged down to capture the expression that was very likely to be turned into 3-second sound bites. People in the production control room cheered quietly. The clip would be edited within minutes. "Oops," Raylan murmured, hands shaking. She tried to laugh it off. Her laugh came out small and nervous. Alexandria's polite chuckle was thin. "Happens to the best of us," she said, but there was the soft internal click of a camera capturing the moment, an heirloom of awkwardness. On a couch 3 streets away, Angelina clicked her phone like someone operating a slot machine. Social media feeds refreshed in real time. The cheese fell, the soundbite flew. Someone had already added the caption, "When you try to be elegant and life says no." The first 100 comments were a parade of laughter and cruelty. Angelina's lips quirked. She swiveled the phone toward Brianna and cackled. "See? She's ridiculous. She'll be gone by morning." But the internet has a mind of its own. Within an hour, the clip had been reposted and remixed into memes, one user overlaying the sound of a cartoon boing. Another cut the moment down to a slow-motion repeat with a text overlay. "She's real." Hashtags bloomed, #real. Raylan, #cheesegate, #homegirl with the sketchbook. People began to stitch their own 10-second videos, versions where she was clumsy and brave, ones where she laughed, ones where they edited in captions celebrating being ordinary. A montage began to bloom across screens, 2-second clips of her flailing with forks, a short loop of her apologizing to a napkin, fans adding little bouquets of digital flowers. Comments poured in, love notes, hilarity, an outpouring of the internet's odd, fierce solidarity. Some influencers made wholesome threads. "If you're clumsy, you're not alone. Watch her, she's adorable." Other accounts created backstory threads, speculating about the sketchbook. 1,000 screens lit up with Raylan in the blue dress that smelled faintly of seawater. Back at the table, Blake watched more than he reacted. There was amusement, yes, but also a depth of attention that didn't flit away like curiosity. When the clip replayed on a small monitor at the corner of the room, production always keeps a live feed, his eyes didn't crinkle in disdain. Instead, something like recognition softened his expression. After dinner, after polite conversation and questions designed to probe, not to comfort, Raylan wandered to the terrace. The air tasted of salt and clipped lawn. She had to breathe. She had to feel something that belonged to her, not to the streaming world. She opened the sketchbook on her lap and thumbed the torn edge of a page. The little doodles of ducks were calming. She told herself not to look at the comments, didn't want to learn too quickly how the world would define her, but the pull was magnetic. She peeked anyway. Her phone buzzed, 2.4M views, 87K comments, trending. A dry, incredulous laugh escaped her. Of all the things, she whispered to the page, of all the things I do, it had to be the cheese. Not the worst origin story, a voice said behind her. Elliot had moved without her noticing. He stood where the terrace met the dark garden, hands in his pockets, watching the horizon. He wasn't wearing a suit now, just a white shirt, sleeves rolled, hair still a little disordered from the sea breeze. Up close, he looked less like an idea, and more like a man, solid, controlled, but accessible. She flinched at herself for being surprised. I thought you were, she stammered. Busy, he finished. So was I. I come down here to check the cameras sometimes. He gestured to the small domes tucked into the eaves. We monitor for transparency. She laughed, a real sound this time, softer. I told you I didn't sign up. I know. He sat down on the low wall beside her, the space between them small, intentionally so. You handled the cheese with dignity. It was not dignified, it was tragic. And the internet called it adorable. He smiled, the half-smile she'd seen at the beach, like the moon cracking open. People are oddly moved by what's genuine. It's rare. The words landed like warm stones. Raylan found herself explaining things she hadn't planned to explain. Collins's soft attempts to be strong, Angelina's cold calculations, the way she moved through the house like a ghost, always apologizing for her existence. She didn't expect to speak so cleanly about shame. She didn't expect him to listen. But he did. Silently, intently, his gaze never leaving her face. You didn't ask for any of this, he said when she finished. And you didn't have to perform. You came in wet and honest. That takes courage. His voice was even, but the edges of it were gentled. For the first time since she'd seen him in the suit, Raylan understood that his interest was not the tabloid kind. It wasn't curiosity for entertainment. It was something quieter, a recognition of a humanity he rarely allowed himself to see. If the crowd likes the cheese, she said half-joking, I'm doomed to be a meme. He tilted his head. Or you're destined to be the kind of person people root for, because you remind them they don't have to be perfect. She let out a breath that had been stuck in her chest. Why does this matter to you? She asked honestly. Why notice me at all? He looked out toward the dark line of the ocean, then back to the sketchbook in her hands. Because sometimes the best things are small, he said. Because you weren't polished or scripted. Because you have something they can't manufacture. A beat. Then, deliberately lighter, he added, also, your laugh is contagious. She felt something loosen, like a knot unwinding. The cameras watched from the eaves, vigilant but respectfully distant. The feed would pick up this moment, of course. Production loved a quiet one-on-one. But it felt like a private thing anyway, the two of them and the sea. At some point, the assistant's earlier announcement came back to life in her mind. Producers loved a turn in public sentiment. The house had already seized on the moment's momentum. She imagined producers in the control room, hands flying over keyboards, planning the evening's algorithms. Before they could get lost in conversation, the house phone chimed inside, a soft, insistent tone that meant official business. Elliot stood, smoothing his shirt. He gave her a look, brief and unreadable, then walked back inside. Through the terrace doors she could see movement, producers pointing at screens, a small flurry like a flock disturbed. A minute later, a discreet text arrived on every contestant's provided device. Producer's note, please be prepared. Cultural pitch scheduled. Please prepare a 5-minute presentation about your philanthropic vision. Raylan looked at the message, then back at the dark ocean. Her stomach turned, fear, and something else, a spark that felt dangerously like possibility. What's about to come next? She breathed, closing the sketchbook and tucking it against her ribs. Is another test. Elliot's voice came from the terrace doorway. Show them who you are, Raylan. Not the meme. You. Elliot's words, show them who you are, not the meme, stayed with Raylan as she walked back to her room. The terrace breeze had done its work. The salt and the quiet sea had rinsed some of the panic away. Now, tethered to the little sketchbook like a talisman, she had to make something out of the jittering knot of fear and the surprising, fragile hope that someone like Elliot might actually be listening. Morning arrived at Harrington House with the kind of crisp light that made every surface look expensive. The production crew hustled through the halls like ants with clipboards, and the contestants' suites became a changing room for personalities. Alexandria, poised, polished, precise, sat with a stylus and tablet, swiping through slick slides as if she were oiling a machine. Aaliyah, meanwhile, applied a lipstick line so exact it could have been used to cut paper. Her phone pinged with PR updates and mock-ups. Raylan spread her few notes on the bed like a picnic of hope. They were messy, a scribbled list, a sketch of a duck, and a half-formed idea about used books and kid-friendly art programs. She tapped the pen against the paper, trying to find the language for something that felt too small for the house and too right for the world. The production assistant knocked and announced, 5 minutes to prep, presentations at 11. Raylan folded her hands in her lap and breathed in, out. She smoothed the worn cover of the sketchbook as if the ragged spine would steady her. There were no graphs, no bullet points, just a life. When the three of them walked into the library, a cathedral of leather chairs and floor-to-ceiling shelves, them and the cameras felt like a single organism. Producers sat with headphones, mics tucked like tiny secrets under their chins. A small monitor blinked the live feed. The world was watching. Alexandria stepped up first. She glided to the podium like she'd rehearsed this exact moment in many rooms. Her slides flicked forward in perfect timing, charts that rose in neat bars, color palettes that suggested legacy and reach, partnership logos that could have been financial endorsements if painted with glamour instead of facts. Good morning, Mr. Diaz, members of the board, she began in a voice that folded around you like silk. My proposal builds on Harrington's philanthropic brand with measurable metrics, university lecture circuits, co-branded literacy festivals, and a scalable digital archive for underserved schools. We'll launch pilots in 3 cities, leverage corporate sponsorship, and forecast measurable growth in engagement and readership over 18 months. She projected numbers, percentages, timelines, donor matrices. Cameras captured her expressionless confidence and the board's appreciative nods. Alexandria's delivery was all strategy and sheen. It landed like an investment package, safe, impressive, inevitable. When the second slide ended, the room clapped with discreet respect. Aaliyah smiled in a way that spelled cash flow. Raylan felt something like admiration for the woman's command, then a twist of anxiety. She had no slides. She had a book. Thank you, Alexandria, Elliot said, neutral, polite. Then he pivoted to Raylan. Miss Barry, whenever you're ready. Her palms were sweat damp. She walked to the microphone like someone walking into a blank ocean. The library's long table reflected chandeliers. On the far edge, producers checked levels. She put the sketchbook on the stand like she was placing a tiny flag on a vast territory. I don't have a PowerPoint, she began, voice small but steady. I have this. She opened the cover. The little drawing of a duck peered up, pages frayed, corners softened by fingers that had loved it into ruin. It was my father's, she said. He read it to me every night. The duck didn't fly, but he learned to swim. That's what my father used to say. Sometimes you don't fly the way people expect. You find other ways to keep going. Her words trembled, but did not break. She explained the idea. It's simple. A used books initiative that collects children's books, worn covers, scrawled notes in the margins, pages with tape, and channels them into local art programs in underfunded schools. We'd create community book drives, pair book donations with art workshops taught by local artists, and mentor kids to make their own small storybooks. It's not about perfect pages. It's about passing on something that was loved. No charts, no forecasts. Just a plea shaped from lived experience. Silence hit the room like a held breath. Alexandria's jaw tightened. Aaliyah's smile thinned into watchful teeth. The producer's monitor showed a faint spike in engagement. People loved an honest story. Elliot leaned forward, elbows on the table. He asked quietly, "May I see the book?" Her hand felt suddenly enormous as she passed the sketchbook across the table. He took it with careful fingers as if handling something fragile and immediately meaningful. He opened to the first page. There, penciled in a looping hand she had traced 1,000 times, a note. "For my Sophie, fly your own way." The ink was faded, the handwriting all soft curves and fatherly promises. Elliot looked up slowly. For the first time, the wall around him thinned. Something private moved across his face, an expression not quite like pity and not like calculation. It was a recognition of particular tenderness. "That's a good idea," he said simply. The words unspooled a ripple that began small and then crested. The cameras zoomed in. You could almost hear the broadcast's heartbeat. Viewers at home tumbled into thread after thread, people who had been grinning at the cheese clip, now wiping imaginary tears. Comments called the initiative humble and revolutionary at once. Fans made collages of the duck with little hearts. A parenting forum copy-pasted her exact proposal as a blueprint for local action. The internet's affection was voluble and immediate. Alexandria's face went pale. Her polished posture stiffened, like a dancer realizing the choreography had changed. She rose slowly, smoothing the hem of her dress. "That's sentimental," she said. "But sentiment doesn't scale. Data does. You can't measure impact with anecdotes." Elliot's fingers closed on the page as if anchoring himself. "Sometimes anecdotes are the map," he replied. "They tell you where the need is. Data tells you how to get there. You need both." There was a hush as the room digested the answer. Alexandria's eyes flashed, a hidden storm. She'd come with projections and corporate scope. A simple story had punctured her armor. For a rare instant, competitiveness, raw and animal, crossed her features. "It's not about sentimentality," she countered with a voice designed to convince shareholders. "It's about sustainable outreach. We scale programs, we partner with institutions, we ensure long-term ROI. "And you're the right person to lead that?" Elliot asked calmly, turning the corner of the exchange into a beam of steady light. He looked at Raylan again, then at Alexandria. Leadership requires more than a plan. Sometimes it needs a heart. The tension in the room shifted from theoretical to personal. Alexandria's composure cracked in a micro-expression. Someone had touched something she valued more than the slide deck. The idea of being the decisive influence in Elliot's philanthropic vision. When the presentation hour ended, producers lingered near the monitor, thumbs already plotting the evening's clips. In the corridor, staff whispered. The hashtag for Raylan's proposal trended. Sponsors sent tentative messages. Elliot's assistant made notes on a tablet, eyes narrowed with interest. Back in her room that evening, Raylan replayed the moment in a dozen ways. Words she'd said, the feel of Elliot's hand on the book, the way Alexandria's smile had thinned. Her chest felt both raw and buoyant. Something that had lived inside her for years, quiet and humble, had been heard. That awareness tasted like both victory and danger. Alexandria retreated to her suite with a cool smile that was all calculation. Alone, she slammed her tablet closed and picked up her phone. The tone in her message was efficient, surgical. Change of plan. Shift PR rollout. Emphasize scalability. Double down on donor outreach. Her fingers moved like someone who planned to win by any means necessary. Producers, meanwhile, were already composing the next week's arc. The show had two kinds of moments they loved: the comic mishap that goes viral, and the unexpected human connection that holds the audience. They liked this one. They liked it a lot. A staff email pinged into every contestant's device. Photography. Note, official photo session scheduled for tomorrow at 2 p.m. Wardrobe provided. Please arrive ready. Production will be handling logistics. Raylan closed her eyes. She hugged the sketchbook to her chest. The house was a machine now, grinding forward on the shape of her life. Somewhere in its gears, however, something human had lodged, and that was both terrifying and miraculous. Outside, the Pacific wind rose, scattering gulls like punctuation. Insinuad in a room that felt both like a sanctuary and a stage. Raylan breathed and tried to imagine the next step. She was no longer merely the clumsy girl who had dropped cheese. She was a woman who had spoken a truth and watched it land like a small, stubborn stone in a deep pond. Comment your favorite moment. Who won your heart? Alexandria's polish or Raylan's brave little truth? The photography studio in Harrington House had the kind of shine that made ordinary things feel studied and staged. Giant softboxes hung like moons over a long set arranged in front of the grand fireplace. An assistant fussed with a silk backdrop while stylists adjusted hems as if they were tuning instruments. Cameras on gimbals rolled quietly, their lenses glinting like watchful eyes. Producers whispered into headsets. This was a moment the show wanted polished, an image that would define the finalists for weeks. Raylan stood just off the set in a simple light blue dress. No sequins, nothing showy, because that was who she'd always been. A stylist smoothed the hem, talking quietly about lights and angles. Across from her, Alexandria carried herself like a practiced ad. Heels, necklace, a smile calibrated for perfection. Aaliyah leaned against a prop chair, checking angles on her phone, her expression cool as a polished stone. "Relax," the photographer called. "We want natural, unrehearsed. Mr. Diaz will be joining you in 2. Elliot arrived exactly on cue, his presence folding the air into a hush. Even without a suit, just a dark sweater and jeans, he had the sort of stillness that tuned the room. He greeted the crew with a terse nod, then moved into place between the two women. The cameras zoomed, the gaffers murmured, and the first clicks began. For a few minutes, everything glowed, the kind of small magic that makes a dress look like a story and a face look like a cover. Then the vase went. It started as a micro-gesture. The assistant bent to adjust a prop, and the heavy porcelain that had sat on a side table dislodged, as if gravity had been given a gentle shove. Water exploded in a white sheet, soil burst like confetti, and an orchid branch lashed outward and found Raylan's ankle. Time did its cinematic slow, flowers tilted, droplets caught the light, the orchid's long stem curling around her calf like an animal wrapping itself into place. Raylan yelped, tried to step back and slipped on tiles slick with water. The orchid wound tighter. Her dress soaked through in seconds. Soil painted her hem in irregular darks. A shard tinkled underfoot. For a heartbeat, everyone froze. Then cameras leaned forward and the room inhaled. Someone shouted for towels. The stylist moved like a swim coach. But before any of the scripted assistants could be arranged, Elliot was across the floor. He reached her in 3 steps, knees bent, hands sure and quick. There was nothing performative in the way he untangled the branch, only the sort of efficiency that betrayed thoughtfulness. He cradled the orchid's end to ease the pressure. His other hand steadied her elbow. When he lifted her to her feet, he wrapped a dry towel around her shoulders with an instinctive gentleness that felt startlingly private, even while the cameras captured every motion. "Are you all right?" he asked, voice low but audible over the hum of the set. The cameras kept clicking. but his attention was a narrow beam aimed solely at her. The look on his face was not the detached curiosity of a man who enjoyed spectacle. It was something like alarm, then tenderness. He held her steady as if she were the only fragile thing in the room. Raylan's breath came in sharp little pockets. Yes, I think so. She laughed in the way that people sometimes did when they weren't sure whether to cry. Soil smudged her fingers, petals dusted her hair. Alexandria's expression was a study in controlled outrage. She managed a high, theatrical gasp, the one that could be weaponized across a million carefully chosen platforms. Aaliyah hovered with a phone in hand, already checking angles and panning for the best shot of what the internet would call the moment. But Elliot's gaze was already scanning past the immediate wreckage. He crouched and examined the ruined base of the vase as a detective might, palm on the floor, eyes tracing a faint, almost invisible line. He reached out and pinched it between finger and thumb. A thread, thin, nylon, stretched taut between the vase and the leg of an ornate chair. The room shifted. You could hear the sound of air leaving a balloon. "No," the photographer whispered, phone frozen mid-frame. Someone in the control room swore quietly. A producer's headset blipped urgent static. Elliot's voice was flat, but every syllable struck. "Who was in the room before we started?" He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His stare cut across the assembled faces and landed on Alexandria first, the woman who'd been seated nearest the chair and who'd arrived early to fuss over the scene. Her face drained pale, fingers tightening around the edge of her clutch. Alexandria opened her mouth, then closed it. This is absurd," she said, voice perfectly measured. "Any of the crew could have—" Elliot's hand still held the thin thread. He looked at her for the length of things that are not said. Intent, opportunity, motive. "That chair was where you were sitting," he said calmly. "You had access. You were here early and you requested the table be set specifically that way. The thread is looped to the leg of your chair." The room's hum turned into chatter. Murmurs swelled like surf. Alexandria's practiced composure finally cracked in a flash. Anger, then fear, then that brittle, thin smile. Aaliyah's eyes glittered with something that could be read as triumph or glee. She looked at Alexandria with the cold satisfaction of a predator smelling weakness. "That's a serious accusation," Alexandria said, rallying herself into a public performance. Wounded dignity. "You have no proof." "We have the thread," Elliot replied. He held it up like a piece of incontrovertible evidence. "We have the timeline. We have witnesses. We'll conduct an internal review, but this is not acceptable." The line between corporate decorum and something more personal had been crossed. Production staff moved with apology and panic, hushing mics, instructing assistants to clear the set. Security appeared at the edges of the frame, quiet, efficient. Alexandria stepped back as if the floor had become a trap. Her eyes flashed with something dangerous and naked. A person who had gambled and lost. Producers made a split-second decision, damage control for the cameras, and for the narrative. Alexandria would leave the house pending an investigation. An assistant placed her coat over her shoulders. Security escorted her through a side door, while cameras, under instruction, pivoted away to preserve the dignity of a moment that had already gone viral. Outside, in homes and on buses and in offices, the clip had already gone live. Unedited. Raw. The feed showed Elliot rescuing Raylan, the awkward wet glow of her dress, the stunned silence, and finally the Norris thin line of nylon between vase and chair. An online chorus rose in real time. Shock, outrage, a tidal wave of defense for the girl who had been pushed and then soaked. Comments spun with righteous anger. "How dare they? This is sabotage. Protect her." If there had been any doubt about where public sympathy would land, it vanished on the spot. Hashtags bloomed, #Team Raylan, Protect Raylan, #Sabotage Exposed. Fan edits spliced the rescue into music clips that made Elliot look like a cinematic hero. Others turned the scene into anthems for anyone who'd ever been humiliated in public. "Share if you're Team Raylan," a prominent influencer posted, and within minutes, that prompt had been reposted into 1,000 feeds. Angelina watched from the flicker of her living room screen like a gambler watching a table clear. The expression on her face moved from smug anticipation 2 hours ago to a small, gnawing panic as the comments piled up in favor of the girl she'd tried to profit from. The tide, she realized, had turned. Back on the set, after Alexandria had been led away, production tried to recompose the shot. But the magic had been broken. The room, once poised for a polished image, was rearranged into a tableau of consequence. Elliot towered in the middle of it, less like a man on a mission and more like someone who had decided what lines would be crossed on his watch. "Get her cleaned," he told a stylist. Then, pausing, and this was the part that felt intimate despite the cameras, he added, "I'd like to speak with her privately after." They wrapped Raylan in towels and led her to a private changing room. The cluster of caretakers moved with professional kindness, but also with a curiosity that prickled like static. In the privacy of the assistant's suite, Elliot knocked gently and entered, closing the door with a soft click that felt like a small safe. "You scared me," Raylan said, the words spilling out as if she had been holding them underwater. She stood wrapped in a towel, hair still damp, cheeks flushed in a combination of embarrassment and adrenaline. "You were brave," Elliot said simply. He didn't offer platitudes. He set a cup of warm tea on a nearby table and sat on the edge of an unused chair. His fingers folded over each other as if he were composing a decision. "That was deliberate. Someone wanted you humiliated." She swallowed. "Why? I mean, what?" Her voice cracked. She had spent a lifetime being expendable. To be the target of a public trap felt like a confirmation of every small cruelty she'd endured. Elliot listened, then looked at the sketchbook on the vanity, still damp from the terrace, its edges crinkled. "Tell me about your childhood," he said. Not an interrogative, an invitation. She spoke, halting at first and then with surprising clarity. Colin's gentle bedtime, Angelina's bargaining eyes, the way she'd learned to take up as little space as possible. As she spoke, his expression softened in a way that wasn't performative for the cameras. The room felt like a small, honest place. "When you said you wanted a place where you didn't have to apologize for existing," he said, "I believed you." Raylan's throat tightened. "It doesn't feel real when a man like you says it." "Maybe it shouldn't feel real," he replied. "Maybe it should just be." He reached across the small distance and placed his hand over the worn cover of the sketchbook. "We'll handle the rest. I won't let them make you a target." Outside, producers were already mapping the next arc. The show had found a storyline richer than any contrived drama. The underdog unjustly targeted, the billionaire who refused to be a bystander. The gala, an event intended to be the season's glittering high point, suddenly took on new gravity. A memo slid across the production office's desk. "Gala. Final impression. All finalists to attend. Dress rehearsal Friday. Public announcement to follow." As Raylan dried her hair by the vanity's warm light, she could feel the world watching. But now they watched because they cared. Her vulnerability had become armor in the most unexpected way. She wrapped the sketchbook to her chest like a small talisman and, for the first time since arriving at Harrington House, allowed herself a small, honest smile. What was coming next would be the most public thing she had ever faced. The gala would be on every feed. The near miss and the rescue would be chapters in the story that the world would tell. But the thread had been found, the sabotage exposed, and Elliot's protection, once abstract and unreachable, had become unequivocally, dangerously, and beautifully real. Raylan Barry had never worn a gown that didn't come from a thrift store clearance rack. So when 3 stylists descended on her like a pit crew for a race car, hair curlers spinning, brushes flashing, fabric swishing, she sat frozen, hands clasped tightly around her sketchbook as if it were a life vest. The borrowed gown lay across the bed, midnight blue, soft as breath, shimmering when the light touched it. The kind of dress that belonged on magazine covers and red carpet royalty, not on Raylan Barry from Ashford Street, who tripped over flat carpets. "Arms up," the stylist ordered. Raylan lifted them obediently, nearly smacking another stylist in the face. Sorry, my arms have their own personality," she muttered. Someone snorted from the doorway. Raylan turned. Elliot Diaz leaned against the frame, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a cufflink. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes... Oh, those eyes lingered. She froze, mid-awkward pose, curlers sticking out of her hair like antennas. "You look..." He stopped, as if the word he wanted didn't exist in English. "Beautiful." Her brain short-circuited. "Beautiful? Me?" She pointed at herself with a shaking curl-defending hand. "While wearing hedgehogs on my head?" A tiny laugh, the kind that escaped him only when he forgot he was Elliot Diaz, billionaire and professional stoic. "It's the glow," he said quietly. "Not the hair." The stylists practically squealed internally. Raylan's heart executed a full somersault. The arrival. Cameras, lights, and one terrified girl. The Harrington Foundation Charity Gala was held in a mirrored ballroom overlooking the Portland skyline. Limousines lined the red carpet. Photographers shouted names. The ocean breeze carried the scent of city lights and anticipation. Raylan stepped out of the mansion's car and immediately tripped on absolutely nothing. Alexandria, in a silver gown and diamond glare, smirked. Aaliyah, cold, perfect, furious, barely hid her eye roll. But the crowd? They cheered. Phone flashes erupted like fireworks. "It's Raylan! The vase girl! We love you!" Raylan's cheeks warmed. Her head spun. Inside a cramped living room miles away, Angelina clutched the remote like she was defusing a bomb. Collins sat stiffly on the sofa, eyes wide. Aaliyah's lone surviving eyebrow twitched so hard it might detach. The dance. Slow steps, fast hearts. The waltz music began, elegant, sweeping. Elliot extended his hand toward Raylan. "Dance with me," he said. Her knees almost buckled. "You want me? To what? With the dancing?" He smiled, an actual smile. "That's usually how it works." She placed her hand in his, instant warmth, instant chaos in her chest. He guided her to the ballroom floor, placing one hand at her waist, the other holding her fingers gently, as if she were made of glass. "I should warn you," she whispered. "I have a history of stepping on expensive shoes." "Then I'll take the risk." They moved, slow, tentative, breathing the same air. Elliot led her through the first turn, steady and sure, his touch firm enough to guide but gentle enough to ask permission. "You're shaking," he murmured. "I think my soul left my body," she whispered back. His laugh, soft, low, vibrated through her. Step by step, she loosened. Her body remembered the rhythm. She followed his lead, trusting him without understanding why. Then the music softened into a hush. Their faces inched closer. Her breath caught. His thumb brushed her waist in the smallest, most devastating touch. "Raylan," he breathed, like her name was something precious. Their foreheads nearly touched. His gaze dropped to her lips. And then, a booming voice shattered the moment. "Elliot, photo op with the board, please!" A donor, older, jolly, entirely oblivious, clapped Elliot on the back hard enough to jolt the universe. Raylan stumbled. Elliot caught her elbow, but the moment was gone. Their almost kiss evaporated into the chandelier light. "Excuse me," Elliot said tightly, frustration flickering across his features for the first time ever. "I'll return." He didn't want to walk away. She saw it, felt it. Every cell in her body screamed at the interruption. "Drop a love emoji in the comments if you felt that moment." By the time Raylan reached the refreshment table, the clip had already gone viral. Yes, already. Screens around the ballroom displayed social media reactions in real time. The way he looks at her, I stopped breathing at the almost kiss. If Elliot doesn't pick Raylan, I'm rioting. Ish Diazberry, Namard Galakis, Gate, Naad, protect Raylan. Her face burned. Somewhere across the ballroom, Alexandria watched with eyes so narrow a breeze could slice them. Her jaw flexed, fury simmering beneath the diamonds she wore like armor. Aaliyah, however, had lost her cool entirely. She stormed toward a waiter, grabbed a champagne flute, downed it like water, and muttered something about rigged narratives and absurd camera favoritism. Raylan pretended not to notice, which was impossible because Aaliyah had the subtlety of a fire alarm. Elliot returns, and the air gets dangerous again. She sensed him before she saw him. A shift in the room, a hum in the air, a breath that wasn't her own. Elliot approached, expression tight, too tight. The kind of tight that meant he'd been thinking. Hard. His eyes softened immediately when they found her. "I apologize," he said, voice low. "That interruption wasn't planned." "I figured," she whispered. "Most people don't tackle billionaires for photo ops." His mouth twitched. "You were incredible out there." "I stepped on your shoe." "I didn't mind. You almost lost a toe. It would have been worth it." That shut her up fast. Before she could properly reboot, a camera drone swooped closer, catching their breath. Close stance, he noticed. He stepped back, corporate mask sliding on like armor. The shift hurt more than the orchid attack. "We should rejoin the crowd," he murmured, but he didn't move. Neither did she. For a suspended moment, they simply looked at each other, and the ballroom, the cameras, the chatter, all blurred into static. The media storm. The world has chosen their favorite. An hour later, as Raylan rested at a corner table, sipping sparkling water and trying not to hyperventilate, the screen beside the orchestra flashed a message. Most viewed moment of the night. The near kiss. 10.7 million views in 42 minutes. She choked on her drink. Meanwhile, backstage, Aaliyah broke a compact mirror. Alexandria whispered furiously to a producer. Angelina screamed into a pillow. The world, unfortunately for them, had fallen completely, irrevocably in love with Raylan Barry. As the gala wound down, Elliot approached Raylan again, but this time there was no warmth. He looked controlled, measured, a storm in a suit. "Raylan," he said quietly, "I need you in my office tomorrow morning." Her stomach flipped. "Oh, okay. Why?" He hesitated, his jaw clenched. "The cameras will be recording," he said, eyes holding hers like something fragile. "Tomorrow, we talk." Talk about what? The dance, the near kiss, the sabotage? The way he looked at her like she was a miracle he didn't know how to hold? But he gave her nothing else. Just that lingering, conflicted stare. And then he walked away, leaving Raylan standing in the dying shimmer of chandelier light, breath short, heart sprinting toward a future she wasn't sure she was ready for. What's about to come next? Elliot's office. No distractions, no masks, no distance, just the truth, and millions watching. If you loved this story, drop a love emoji, like, share, and comment. Where you're watching from. The sun had not yet climbed all the way over the Pacific, but the terrace was already waking. A soft wash of pale gold, the faint cry of gulls, the distant hush of waves. Morning on the Diaz estate held a different kind of hush than night. It felt deliberate, like the world was pausing to listen. Raylan arrived with the sketchbook under her arm and the hollow feeling of exposure in her gut. Her dress from the gala was carefully folded on a chair in her room. Tonight she'd sleep in plain clothes and let the world roll as it would. Now she stepped onto the terrace, 2 wicker chairs placed just so, a slender table between them, and beyond, a vast sweep of gray ocean that seemed to swallow any pretense. 2 cameras were tucked into discreet corners, small domes barely peeking from under eaves. Production told them these were for transparency. In truth, the cameras were hungry. So was the public. Millions were already tuned to anything Elliot did. The terrace would be live within 10 minutes. Elliot was already there when she came out, leaning on the rail, hands folded. He wore the same calm that had become his armor, but today it had a different edge, less corporate, more deliberate. When he turned, the morning light caught the ridge of his cheekbone. "Thank you for coming," he said simply. She sat. Her fingers toyed with the worn corner of the sketchbook. Her voice felt small in the space between them. "I asked you here because I want honesty," Elliot said, his tone even. "Not a sound bite, not a staged vulnerability. I want what's real. For the record, everything you say may be broadcast." Her throat tightened. The cameras were there, yes, but the invitation was not a trap. It felt like someone opening a door to let a breeze move stale air out. She inhaled. "Okay." She started hesitant, as if stepping onto ice. "My father, Collins, he used to read to me every night. He worked long hours, delivered supplies to stores at dawn. After he came home, he'd sit on my bed and read that same book, about a duck that couldn't fly. He'd change his voice for the characters. He made me believe small things could be brave." Raylan's fingers folded a corner of a page. "When he died, I was 13. The house changed. Angelina moved in like a season somebody forgot to mention. She was practical, efficient. She taught me to take up less space. She taught Aaliyah to get on planes and wear the world like it owed her something. I learned to be quiet." She paused, watching the ocean tilt and blink. The cameras recorded everything. The public would hear it all. She thought of Collins's hands smoothing a blanket over her when she was sick. She thought of him showing her how to tie a shoelace when she was 5. These memories felt sacred and small at once. And then one day she saw a show, a scheme, really, about a billionaire choosing a partner for a philanthropic program. Angelina saw dollar signs. She filled out a form without telling me. She sent me like a package. Her voice broke on the last word. "For her, I was a commodity," she said, looking toward Elliot but seeing Angelina's smug face for a heartbeat. "She offered me, like a joke, like a way to get money. I got on a bus and I thought maybe this was a mistake. Maybe it would be an easy way to earn some rent money. I didn't know I would be dragged smiling onto millions of screens." Elliot's jaw worked once. There was a silence long enough for gulls to punctuate. He listened with the kind of attention reserved for things that matter. Focused, steady, compassionate. "You didn't deserve that," he said finally. No platitudes, no boardroom calm, just a human statement. "I know," she whispered. "But you heard about the vase. You probably saw the thread. Angelina, she's always been small, petty things to make me feel less than. But to force humiliation like that," her hands trembled. She closed her eyes because she could feel the image of that vase like a bruise. Elliot reached out, resting a hand on the table as if to bridge the distance between them without touching her. "What happened to you was cruel. It was calculated, and I am sorry you had to be its target." He didn't make it about the show. He made it about her. The cameras kept rolling. The live stream showed 2 silhouettes against a waking sea, a quiet confessional scene that felt like a private thing except for the millions watching as if they were peering through a keyhole. "You mean what you said," Raylan said, letting the tiny confession out. "When you said you have the right to dream. I wanted to ask, why would you care? Why would you notice someone like me?" Elliot's fingers drummed the wood once. "Because I've watched a lot of curated performances," he said. "I've invested in polished narratives and controlled PR, and I've realized that humans get weary of perfection masquerading as depth. Your truth, Your clumsy, stubborn honesty tells me something real exists beyond my spreadsheets. And beyond that, he paused, and the vulnerability in his voice was almost shocking. It was as if he had stripped boardroom armor down to the bare metal. I watched you with my own eyes when you rescued that book on the beach. I saw someone who had something that mattered. Not brand value, not optics. His candor was a kind of shelter. Raylan felt faintly dizzy, like someone who had walked into sun after weeks of winter. You shouldn't have been offered, Elliot continued. No one should be offered. People are not prizes. People are not currency. That kind of transaction is monstrous. Out on social feeds, the terrace footage rolled across screens. A hashtag thread had already started. #listen to Raylan. #not a prize. Viewers flooded comment sections with empathy. How could anyone treat another human like that? Angelina is cruel. Collins, you tried. In a small living room in town, the camera showed Angelina sipping coffee at first, smug. Then her face flushed as push notifications multiplied. Breaking. Contestant describes being offered by her family for money. Clips of Raylan's confession overlapped. The tone in Angelina's mouth changed from entitlement to alarm. Her fingers flew over a keyboard. She called Collins. Her voice had lost its practiced breeziness, and now sounded frightened in a way that had never happened before. On the terrace, Elliot's voice was steady. You have my apologies, in the public sense, and my protection in the private. If you want, Harrington Foundation will allocate resources, not as charity, but as partnership, to your idea for used books and art workshops. We will fund pilot programs, provide logistical support, and help you take it where you want it to go. The camera caught Raylan's face, astonished, reluctant, hopeful. Tears pricked her eyes, not theatrical ones, but small, honest ones. The stream erupted into a soundless flood of hearts and comments from viewers moved by the offer. I'm not offering charity, Elliot said before she could refuse. I'm offering collaboration. I want your voice in this. If you'll have it, I'd like you to help design the program, on your terms. The invitation felt like a lifeline. For the first time, Raylan imagined an existence that didn't require crouching, one where her own initiatives were valid and powerful. She pictured children opening battered books and drawing their own worlds. She pictured her father reading aloud as a memory translated into action. Yes, she said finally. The word seemed to empty the space of doubt. It landed gentle and loud. Yes, I want that. Elliot's expression released into something like relief. He made a note on a tablet. Business, gentleness, action shaped into a plan. In the small hush that followed, the cameras didn't intrude. The viewers at home typed out support and gratitude. The internet folded them into a chorus. But the world beyond the terrace was not a single note. The tremors of truth had consequences that rippled outward. That afternoon, producers collated footage and flagged a clip for internal review. Executives realized they had, perhaps accidentally, created a narrative that was now shaped by real hurt rather than produced spectacle. Sponsors texted, their messages cautious as if balancing a ledger of risk and goodwill. Alexandria, meanwhile, seethed in her suite, impotent in defeat and furious at being outmaneuvered by something she could neither buy nor choreograph. Angelina, watching her leverage dissolve into online fury, hammered at her phone. She called old friends, half screamed at Collins, blamed algorithms and those kids for mocking her. Collins, who had spent years deferring to her, felt something crack open in him. Shame, perhaps, then resolve. The confession had reached into his chest and pried something loose. He sat down hard in a kitchen chair, hands pressed to his face. Within hours, the public response was unmistakable. The narrative had shifted. What had started as a contrived spectacle had become a story of exploitation, and most viewers chose compassion. As the sun slid lower, Elliot sat with Raylan a while longer, plotting the first steps, meeting with his foundation director, drafting a pilot plan, reaching out to community artists. His tone was businesslike now, practical. But the thing that impressed most was the way his plans centered Raylan's voice. "You can make this yours," he said. "Not a token, not a PR stunt, real work. If at any point you want to step back, we step back." She nodded. The weight in her chest shifted just a fraction lighter. But for every momentum, there can be pushback. Late that evening, a succinct, icy email arrived to production and selected news outlets. Legal counsel retained. Unfounded allegations to be addressed. We deny any wrongdoing. The sender, Alexandria's law firm. Another message followed, a carefully worded press release that hinted at manufactured drama and threatened legal action for defamation. No smear was too small, no threat too indirect. Alexandria would not be outshone without an attempt to correct the narrative, by whatever means necessary. Raylan read the headlines that followed and felt adrenaline spike. She had freed her voice, and someone with resources and a bruised ego was already sharpening the tools of retaliation. Elliot saw the change in her posture and folded his hand around hers for a second. An anchor. "We'll respond properly," he said. "We'll be transparent. We'll show what happened, and we'll stand with you." The cameras on the terrace had captured the confession. The confession had detonated reputations, rearranged loyalties, and given Raylan a strange new agency. But as they closed for the night, and the feed dimmed on millions of screens, a darker scene was setting up outside the mansion's ornate walls. Legal papers being drafted, PR teams whispered into phones, and a determined woman plotting a final push. If this made you cry, if Raylan's truth moved you, comment your country below. I'll read the best ones out loud. What was coming next would not be a quiet conversation on a terrace. It would be a war of narratives. The morning after the terrace confession felt like the calm before a storm. Only the storm arrived with emails, media calls, and the electric buzz of a narrative war. Alexandria didn't retreat quietly. She struck. At first it was a drip, an anonymous DM here, a thinly sourced tweet there. Then the flood. A curated dossier leaked to tabloids, claiming Raylan's sob story was manufactured. Screenshots circulated alleging Raylan had coached lines with production. A suggested timeline implied the sketchbook was a prop. A whispered op-ed asked coyly whether the show had scripted every authentic sob. Producers at Harrington House watched their control monitors like men watching a dam crack. "This is coordinated," one producer said, fingers flying across a keyboard. "These aren't random. They've used multiple outlets, blogs, pay-for-play accounts, and a planted artist who's been paid to call the beach rescue staged." The show's PR team moved from defensive to reactive within an hour. Coffee cups multiplied. Scripts for statements were written and rewritten. "We cannot let this define the arc," a senior producer hissed. "We need proof, clear, damning proof, that these leaks are manufactured. If Alexandria has a legal team, she'll try to bury us in litigation. We have to be ready." Elliot's office became a war room. His legal counsel arrived within the hour. A crisp team that smelled faintly of leather and courthouse paper. They read the leak dossier, annotated timestamps, flagged defamatory language. "We'll file a cease and desist for the articles and subpoena the source of the leaks," the lead attorney said. "If these claims persist, we will pursue defamation. We will not allow intimidation." Elliot's voice carried the kind of decision that bends corporate gears. "We will not be bullied into quieting a victim," he said. "Our response will be transparent, factual, and firm." The legal team moved with the kind of speed that makes headlines. Letters went out, formal, pointed. Alexandria's counsel replied with a carefully calibrated fury, insinuations about staged sadness, hints of proof. Thin, designed to smear, if repeated. But the court of public opinion was not a quiet courtroom. It was a stadium, and fans had found their chant. Within hours, grassroots rally pages popped up. An online fundraiser launched by a group of fans for Raylan's Art and Books pilot exploded past its modest target, Crowdfunding notifications pinged on Raylan's phone. Donations small and large. $5 here, $500 there, with notes like, "For every kid who deserves a worn-out favorite," and "Because you didn't deserve that vase." Local community centers offered space. Independent bookstores wrote to Elliot's foundation offering to partner. The internet, which had earlier loved a cheese mishap, now loved a cause, and the cause had a face. "If you want justice served, smash that like." Inside the mansion, the pressure showed in different ways. Angelina's smugness curdled into panic. She called production with frantic, clipped voice. "This is a disaster! Fix it!" But the calls went to Scripps, to legal counsel. Collins, who had long taken the easier path of silence and acquiescence, listened to the chaos unfold and felt something like hot iron inside his chest. He had been quiet while Angelina signed forms and pushed him to accept the gift of security. He had let Raylan go without asking her how she felt because the easier road had always looked safer, fewer conflicts, fewer criticisms. But seeing his daughter's face on screens being lampooned, then defended, then lauded, something shifted. Collins found himself standing in his kitchen with his phone clutched so tight his knuckles whitened. He called Angelina, and for the first time in years, he did not placate her. "No," he said. "We won't do this. We won't try to hide it. She is my daughter." His voice cracked on the last word, but carried enough conviction to shake the room. Angelina sputtered. "You can't just—" she began, outrage roaring. "Watch me," Collins said. He hung up and walked into the small production office on Ashford Street, an act that was more symbolic than logistical, and asked for a public platform to correct the record. The producers, initially wary of more family theatrics, found that Collins' voice, raw, apologetic, finally earnest, moved the needle in ways lawyers could not. He agreed to a recorded statement, an apology to Raylan for how she'd been treated, an admission that he had been too meek, and a declaration that he would support his daughter publicly going forward. The statement ran across morning feeds. Angelina's face, previously smug in her camera-ready composure, looked smaller on screens as the narrative pivoted. Viewers who had once laughed at the cheese now watched a man try, clumsily but sincerely, to do the right thing. The public warmed toward the idea of restoration, Collins admitting error and making amends. Back at Harrington House, Elliot's legal team wasn't waiting for public sentiment alone. They worked the facts. Forensic review of internal camera footage, routine for the production, revealed metadata that mattered. The cleaning crew's schedule showed no one near the vase before setup, except for the photography assistant and Alexandria, who had requested that specific chair be placed earlier than the other seating arrangements. Security logs corroborated her early presence in the room. Metadata timestamps from the control room camera, footage that had not been broadcast live, showed a shadow near the side table at a time when the vase was placed. A higher resolution clip, pulled from a secondary angle and examined frame by frame, revealed a slender hand adjusting something at the base of the vase minutes before the shoot, something that could have been a thread. The hand's rings and the cuff of its sleeve matched the coat Alexandria had been seen wearing earlier that day. This was the technical slow burn that the tabloids could not manufacture. The legal team compiled the proof and presented it in a concise, damning brief. Alexandria's counsel tried to parry. They threatened countersuits and claimed production had manipulated footage for narrative impact. They pushed documents and obfuscation. But the combination of forensic data, security logs, and an inadvertent confession from a nervous production assistant who had been coerced into silence, someone who'd been promised immunity in exchange for telling the truth, became a tide the defense could not staunch. The assistant's voice was small but clear in deposition. Yes, pressure had been applied to stage moments. Yes, there had been whispers. But no one had staged the vase incident. The assistant's admission that they had been pressured to withhold information shifted the legal landscape into a place where facts mattered more than PR spin. Social feeds shifted with the evidence. Team Raylan trended in bigger numbers. The fundraiser for the art program soared past 6 figures. Local news pickups amplified the message. An exploited contestant, A billionaire stepping in, a family publicly trying to make amends, a tidy 3-act drama of humiliation, defense, and solidarity. Alexandria's smear campaign, built on insinuation and leverage, began to look like a clumsy attempt to weaponize rumor when faced with the cold light of timestamps and testimony. Sponsors who had once flirted with her brand began to distance themselves, afraid of being associated with the machinations. A few influential columnists who'd taken Alexandria's side issued retractions, or at least tempered their praise. There was still tension. Alexandria's legal team filed a notice of intent to sue for reputational damage, a final, desperate move that aimed to silence critics through fear of litigation. Elliot's lawyers responded in kind, not with threats, but with an assurance that they would expose the attempt at sabotage in full if the suit proceeded. Public loyalty found other forms too. Street-level rallies popped up, small groups gathering outside Harrington House with signs, "Books not prizes," "Protect her, keep your hands off the vulnerable." Volunteers called local radio shows, independent bookstores offered to host the pilot workshops. The movement felt grassroots and sincere, not manufactured. It reached a point where Alexandria's meticulously constructed persona, the woman who had moved through rooms with the confidence of someone in control, cracked, not with fireworks, but with slow, visible erosion. The more her legal team pressed, the more the underlying facts were pulled into light. An old message thread leaked from her own planner, dated weeks before the vase incident, where she'd joked crudely about scenes and viral moments. Whether it was a careless note or a deliberate plant, the message did what 1,000 ads could not. It made her look human and fallible in a way the public did not forgive. When the final internal review concluded, producers made a swift public call. Alexandria was to be removed from the show for breach of conduct, pending the results of a formal investigation. The statement was litigious and careful, but the point was clear. The sabotage had been exposed. The reaction was immediate and fierce. Fans celebrated online with a fervor that bordered on jubilant. Raylan's fundraiser doubled overnight. Elliot's foundation announced a matching grant for the pilot program, amplifying the community's efforts into institutional support. Collins, who had been paralyzed under Angelina's thumb for so long, took a stand publicly, calling for accountability and offering to participate in community outreach to make amends. For Raylan, the victory was bittersweet. The humiliation had been real. The public vindication could not undo the wet dress, the smell of soil, or the immediate shame. But now she had allies, real, principled allies. She had resources. She had a platform on which to build something that mattered. She had a man who had stepped in not as a patronizing savior, but as a partner who publicly anchored his words with actions. As the dust settled, Elliot called a meeting in the main hall. Cameras were shut off for part of it, intentionally private, and then a release was prepared. He addressed the public with a measured voice that sounded like an executive and a protector at once. "In this house," he said, "we will not manufacture shame. We will not profit by diminishing people. We will be accountable, and we will support those who have been harmed." Then, in a move that would electrify the fan base, he looked at Raylan, no cameras for that private moment, and asked softly but publicly through his statement, "Will you join me on the stage for the final decision?" The press release followed. Final decision to be announced live. Miss Raylan Barry invited to join Mr. Diaz on stage. The invitation was a clarion call. The chatter began immediately. Social feeds buzzed with speculation. Was this a publicity stunt? An act of kindness? A declaration of intent? Fans flooded comment threads with encouragement. Detractors bristled. The narrative had reached a fever pitch. As the chapter closed on the week's drama, lawsuits threatened, rallies organized, evidence presented, and reputations reshaped, the one sure thing was this. The final choice would no longer be merely for a chamber of corporate hearts. It would be a public reckoning. Raylan sat alone that night with her sketchbook, feeling the weight of what had changed. She had gained agency and allies. Collins had begun to redeem himself. Elliot's commitment had become unmistakable and principled. And yet, as the world prepared to watch the final decision live, there was a hush of something else, an edge of dread and hope braided together. What came next would be final, televised, and impossible to ignore. The stage lights cut through the pre-dawn haze like the eye of a giant. Rows of cameras looked back at Harrington House, as if the estate itself were being photographed. It felt impossibly large, the sort of set that swallows ordinary feeling and amplifies everything until it thrums. The main hall had been transformed into a theater, a small raised platform, velvet rope, and a semicircle of seats for a live audience that included donors, press, and a handful of ordinary people chosen by lottery. Screens hung from the rafters, showing live reactions from around the world. Raylan stood behind the velvet rope for a long minute, fingers folded around her sketchbook so tightly the paper creased. Her stomach was a constellation of nerves. Collins sat near the front, his chest tight with a helplessness that had softened into resolve. Angelina, cloaked in an anxious spray of perfume and white-lit rage, sat beside him like a storm trying to look polite. Across the sea of faces were friends she'd made since the VAS, a librarian from Southeast Portland, a teacher who'd volunteered for the book drive, a teenager who'd donated his allowance. Cameras found their faces and held them like testimony. Far away, on a couch in a tidy apartment, Alexandria watched with an intensity that was equal parts calculation and collapse. The legal threats still hovered, but tonight she had to watch a man she'd tried to game choose a path she couldn't buy. Elliot stepped onto the stage with the kind of quiet confidence he used in boardrooms, but tonight the boardroom felt microscopic compared to the gravity in the room. He cleared his throat. The studio hush contained its own electricity. "Good evening," he began, voice measured. The teleprompters were off. He had chosen to speak from the chest. "Thank you for being here. Thank you to everyone watching live. This evening we will close a chapter, not through spectacle, but through something harder, honesty." A row of cameras eased in. The global feed ticked numbers in the millions. The producer signaled, "Hold," and the audience leaned in as if the sound itself were sacred. Before the reveal, Elliot lifted a hand in a small, almost ceremonial pause. The room, the cameras, the millions of viewers at home, they all felt like breath held. "Pause, like subscribe, and tell us now where you're watching from," he said, and for a beat his smile was the most human thing he'd shown in months. It wasn't a line. It was an acknowledgement that this moment belonged to everyone who had followed the story, who had rallied behind a girl with a sketchbook. The halting, silly warm-up notes of a crowd-pleasing CTA dissolved, and then Elliot pivoted. The corporate mask receded. "I am the steward of a foundation," he continued, "and my role, for many years, has been to choose projects that maximize impact, visibility, and return. Tonight I stand before you with a choice that does not fit neat spreadsheets." His gaze slid to Raylan. The camera found her and magnified the beat in which the world seemed to wait. "I could choose the woman who most closely aligns with optics and expected outcomes," he said, each word deliberate. "I could choose ease, the polished narrative that comforts sponsors. I could pick the safe bet, wealthy alliances, photo-ready strategies, and all the predictable applause that follows." He let that idea hang, heavy and glittering. A ripple ran through the wealthy rows. Somewhere backstage, a sponsor's fingers tightened around a champagne flute. Their faces were the practiced masks of people invested in certainty. "But I have watched something else unfold," Elliot said, voice changing. "I have watched a truth that refuses to be edited into convenience. I have seen the courage of someone who was offered as a joke, and who instead offered honesty. I have watched a community rise, not because of spectacle, but because it recognized something human." He paused, and this time it was not for a social prompt. It was to breathe. "What matters," he said quietly, "is not who makes the best headline. It is who creates the truest impact. It is not optics alone that define value. It is the courage to choose a person's capacity over their convenience. The room shifted. The corporate rhetoric had peeled. The human thrust forward. Elliot turned to Raylan and stepped down so that when he reached her, he did not speak across a gulf, but beside her. "Raylan Barry," he said, "you arrived here the way many of us arrive at life's hardest moments, with little more than a handful of memory and a stubborn, battered book. You were offered like a prize. You were treated like property. I've watched the world, our world, respond to the truth you gave us. I've learned that leadership sometimes demands letting yourself be moved." Raylan's hands trembled. Collins made a sound like a small, surprised sob. "And so," Elliot said, measuring the next words like steps across fragile ice, "I'm not choosing you as a trophy. I'm not choosing optics. I'm choosing partnership." For a second, the house forgot to breathe. He continued, "I am asking you to join the Harrington Foundation, not as a ornament, not as a brand asset, but as a co-designer of the pilot program you proposed. You will have authority and resources. We will fund the used books initiative and the art workshops with long-term support. Beyond that, I am offering an open invitation. If you choose, you can stay in my life. Not as a headline, not as a role defined by my expectations, but as someone I want alongside me, professionally and personally, if you wish." The words landed with the quiet force of something irrevocable. For anyone listening, this was no press stunt. It was risk. He had not promised marriage, nor a title, nor instant guarantees. He had promised partnership, funding, a seat at a table, and a personal invitation that implied, delicately, a willingness to let his life entangle with hers. The feed burst into noise. Live comments flooded in as if the internet had no other business. This is real." He chose her heart. Finally, authenticity over pageantry. Thousands of hearts, then millions. The reaction firestorm was immediate and complicated. Some outraged voices cried manipulation, accusing Elliot of publicity theater. Tabloid pundits decried the billionaire's PR stunt, but the louder chorus was one of elation. Millions who had rooted for the human against contrivance. Millions who wanted to believe that someone in power could choose compassion. Angelina's face, previously bruised by public censure, went an ashen, almost theatrical shade of green. Her hands trembled. Collins reached for hers as if to steady both her and himself, and as he did, something unthinkable for him happened. He squeezed back, an admission in gesture, if not yet in words. The cameras found Alexandria and held her like a slow-motion fall. At home, she stood abruptly, fingers cold against the arm of her couch, UV screen glow reflecting in her eyes. Legal advisors called, defamation suits and spin doctors arranged like chess pieces. But the image that dominated the feeds was not legal maneuvering. It was a man offering real power to a woman who had been told she was nothing more than an entry on a form. Then the applause rose, genuine and bright. People stood. A few donors who had come expecting a safe choice now rose with faces rearranged by surprise. The mood shivered from spectacle to something like hope. After the microphones were closed, and the audience filed out in a hum of commentary, Elliot guided Raylan off stage to a small private alcove draped in warm shadow. Here the cameras were not allowed, only the house staffers and the hum of an exhausted crew. The moment felt less like a finale and more like a beginning. He drew her close in a way that wasn't performative. He looked at her like someone who'd just admitted a truth and was waiting for permission to keep speaking. "You were brave," he said simply. "You were risky," she replied, half smiling, half in disbelief. "You could have chosen the easy script." "And that's exactly why I didn't," he answered. "Because stories are rarely good when they choose easy." They sat in the quiet, the press of the night easing into the edges of the room like tide. For a while they spoke in small things, the absurdity of a cake that tasted like wax, the weird taste of charity champagne, the sincerity of a librarian who cried on live TV when she heard about the program. They began to imagine, not too far into the future. because neither of them liked the word forever yet, but close enough to breathe. Classrooms lined with creaky chairs, and the bright scrawl of small hands making books. A modest office where Raylan could call the shots. Dinners where Collins might show up without an apology tucked into his pocket. Their conversation was ordinary and therefore astounding. It felt possible. As the hush settled and the estate began the slow unwinding from spectacle to routine, an assistant appearing at the alcove's edge held an envelope with rough edges and a stamp smudged by travel. She explained, voice soft. A letter had arrived for Raylan, no return address, found in the main mail when the estate opened for the night. Raylan took it with hands that were still trembling from the stage. The envelope felt like a small, extraordinary thing. On the front, in a handwriting she didn't recognize, was only one word: Sophie. Her breath stalled. A letter with one name could be anything. A mistake, a prank, a relic. But the name, Sophie, pulled something inside her like a compass finding north. Elliot watched her face as she slit the envelope. Inside was a folded note and a small page of sketches. Lines like a child's, but practiced with familiar curves. The note read, "If you ever wondered about where you come from, meet me at the old pier. I left something under the third plank. M's." Raylan's fingers brushed the sketch, an awkward drawing of a duck and a tiny house. Her heart tightened in a way that felt like home and like a riddle all at once. "What is it?" Elliot asked cautiously, the edges of his curiosity tempered by concern. She looked up, eyes wet, stunned, and whispered, "A letter from someone who calls herself M. It says she left something under the third plank at the old pier." The world, which only minutes earlier had been a chorus of reaction, seemed to hold its breath again. Roots, the places we come from, had a way of complicating happily ever afters. The letter was small and tender, and, despite everything, impossible to ignore. "What's next?" Elliot asked, both a question and an offer. Raylan folded the note into herself like a new private map. "I find out," she said. "I want to know." He nodded. "We find it together," he said. Outside, lights from the city shimmered on the Pacific, and the cameras, millions strong, recorded the ending of one public story and the trembling first steps of another. The choice had been made. Vulnerability had won, but the next revelation promised to change the meaning of belonging forever. The letter sat between Raylan's palms like something alive, not heavy, not light, just full. The edges were worn, as if whoever wrote it had held it for too long before finally letting it go. Inside was a rough sketch, a little duck, a pier, a crooked star, and a tiny hand-drawn map of the Portland coastline. At the bottom, only one initial: M. Elliot stood beside her in the quiet alcove where they had escaped after the live broadcast. The applause from millions still echoed in Raylan's bones. But this letter, made the world go silent. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. Raylan swallowed. "I don't know, but I have to try." Elliot nodded, offering his hand without pressure, without expectation. She took it. They spread the letter and map across the terrace table. The sea wind pressed the edges, as if trying to read the words with them. "It looks like a hand-drawn trail," Elliot murmured, tracing a line from the beach to an old pier she recognized from childhood. "My adoptive dad, Collins, used to take me fishing there. Before everything changed." Elliot looked at her, searching. "Do you think this could really be from your birth mother?" "I don't know," Raylan whispered. "I barely remember her. Just flashes, warmth, humming when she brushed my hair. Like a memory wrapped in fog." She tapped the map. "But this? It feels like someone who knew me." Elliot touched her hand gently. "Then let's follow it." Together, they folded the map, stepped into the ocean-salted night, and walked toward the past. The pier groaned under their steps, old, weathered, but holding on. The moon reflected on the water like scattered silver coins. Raylan knelt at the third plank, the one marked with a tiny drawn star on the map. Her pulse thudded. "Hand me the flashlight," she whispered. Elliot crouched beside her, steadying the plank as she lifted it with shaky fingers. Underneath, wrapped tightly in plastic and string, lay a small tin box the size of her palm. Raylan gasped. She opened it slowly. Inside was a tiny seashell necklace, one she remembered wearing as a toddler. A faded photo of a woman holding a baby. A note, the ink almost erased by time. She lifted the note, and Elliot steadied her trembling hand so she could read. "My Raylan," they said. "I had to let you go. But I left you a piece of my world, so one day you'd find your way back. Forgive me." Mama Raylan blinked fast as the tears came and didn't stop. The wind carried her sob like a bird set free. Elliot wrapped an arm around her, not claiming, not crowding, just anchoring. "She loved you," he whispered. Raylan nodded into his shoulder. I always hoped she did." She pressed the photo to her heart, feeling a piece of herself click into place. By the next morning, the letter had spread across the internet, the Foundation's PR team confirming its authenticity through handwriting reconstruction. It wasn't scandal. It was story. And the public adored stories. Collins showed up at Harrington House before sunrise, eyes red, breath shaky. Raylan met him at the gate. He looked smaller than she remembered, not in statures, but in spirit. "Raylan," he breathed, voice breaking. "I failed you. I let someone else." His voice cracked completely. "Convince me you were worth less than the world." Raylan's throat tightened. "Dad." He fell to his knees right there on the driveway. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I wasn't strong enough, but I am now. And if you'll let me, I want to make it right." Raylan knelt with him, placing her forehead to his. "You already started. You didn't let Angelina smear me. You defended me when it counted." He sobbed into her shoulder, and she held the part of her childhood that had tried, even when everything else failed. Angelina arrived shortly after, rehearsed indignation etched into her face. "I suppose you expect gratitude," she sneered, "for all this attention your pity story has brought? I won't apologize for wanting security for my daughter, for all of us." Elliot stepped forward with a calm that chilled the air. "Ms. Barry, the investigation into your misuse of Raylan's identity is underway. There will be hearings, but I'll tell you this. Greed is not a legal defense." Angelina's eyes flashed. "You can't." "You used her," he said. "You tried to profit off her humiliation. And now the consequences are finally yours." Security escorted her out, not harshly but firmly. A small, morally earned comeuppance. Collins watched, shoulders slumping in relief. Raylan squeezed his hand. "Now we move forward," she said softly, and for the first time in years, he nodded without fear. 2 weeks later, the Harrington Foundation unveiled the first Storykeepers initiative, community art circles used. Book donation hubs, reading nights, free therapy workshops for kids in transition homes. Raylan stood at the center of it all, not the clumsy girl who dropped cheese or the unwanted joke chosen for profit. A leader, a creator, a voice. Kids rushed around her in a whirlwind of crayons, torn pages, and laughter. "Miss Raylan, look, I finished my book." "Do you like my duck? He flies kind of sideways." "Can Elliot read us a story? He promised." Elliot, sleeves rolled up, hair softer now that stress wasn't crushing him, lifted a child onto his shoulders. "I said one story," he protested mildly. "You said 3, the kids yelled back. Raylan laughed, loud, real, beautiful. The cameras were present, but this time they didn't tell the story. The community did. People donated boxes of books, some old, some bent, some filled with the notes of parents who had once read them aloud. The walls soon glowed with children's art: ducks, ocean waves, houses, stars. Full circle. Healing wrapped in paper and glue. At sunset, Raylan walked the shoreline of Portland Beach, the same place where her sketchbook had once tried to escape and where a barefoot billionaire had caught her life mid-tumble. Elliot walked beside her now. No cameras, no producers, no microphones. Just the tide and the wind and something new between them, gentle, steady, unforced. "You know," he said, kicking a shell lightly, "if that sketchbook hadn't run away, none of this would have happened." Raylan smirked. "So you're saying the book was destiny?" "I'm saying, he replied, brushing a lock of hair from her cheek, "that sometimes the universe gives us chaos so we notice our blessings." She leaned into him, letting her head rest against his shoulder. "Do you regret the choice? Choosing me, I mean." "Not once," Elliot said without hesitation. "You weren't the safe choice. You were the real one." A wave curled around their ankles. Raylan breathed deeply, feeling a world that finally fit her. "You know," she whispered, "for someone offered as a joke, I ended up being pretty lucky." Elliot laughed, not the careful laugh of a CEO, but the open, unscripted one she had been waiting for. "You weren't the joke," he said softly. "You were the gift." She held his hand, and this time, she wasn't trembling. Raylan turned toward the invisible audience of millions who had followed her story. Her smile was warm, grateful, full of the confidence she once thought she'd never earn. "If you loved this journey," she said, "smash that like button, share the story, subscribe for more, and comment your country. I'll pin the best replies. Thank you for believing in the girl who everyone thought was a joke, but turned out to be the greatest gift of someone's life." The wind swept her hair. Elliot squeezed her hand. The ocean hummed. And the story, her story, finally began.